The pristine white Tesla gleamed in the afternoon sun as Miranda Chen stepped out, her designer heels clicking against the cracked pavement of Millfield's only gas station. She didn't see the weathered rancher watching from his dusty pickup truck, didn't notice how his knuckles whitened around the steering wheel when she approached the water. Spigot marked livestock only. What she did next would cost her more than just her pride, would unleash a chain of events involving 2 head of cattle, a viral video, and a lesson in small-town justice she'd never forget. Because sometimes, when you steal from the wrong person in the wrong place, the universe has a very particular way of settling the score. Jake Morrison had been driving cattle trucks for 15 years, but he'd never been this desperate for water. The August heat shimmered off Highway 84 like a living thing. And in the back of his livestock trailer, 43 head of prime Angus were starting to show signs of stress. Their lowing had grown more urgent over the past hour, and Jake could hear the shuffle of hooves as they pressed against each other, seeking whatever shade they could find. The thermostat on his dashboard read 103 degrees. In the trailer, it was easily 10 degrees hotter. Come on, he muttered, scanning the horizon for the familiar blue and white sign of Millfield's truck stop. When it finally appeared, wavering in the heat like a mirage, Jake felt his shoulders drop with relief. He'd been running this route from the Patterson Ranch to the processing plant in Oakville for 3 years now, and he knew every water stop along the way. Millfields had the best set up a dedicated livestock watering station, spigot that could fill his trailer's water tanks in under 10 minutes. As he pulled into the dusty lot, Jake's trained eye automatically cataloged the other vehicles. A few 18-wheelers catching mandatory rest, a couple of pickup trucks that belonged to locals, and one vehicle that stood out like a diamond. In a Colmena spotless white Tesla Model S with California plates, Jake maneuvered his rig toward the livestock area, a separate section of the truck stop marked with faded signs that read cattle watering, commercial use only. The Tesla was parked near the main building, but as Jake climbed down from his cab, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A woman in a cream-colored business suit was standing at his water spigot. She was tall, maybe 35, with perfectly styled black hair, and the kind of posture that screamed corporate, boardroom. In her manicured hands, she held a large insulated water bottle, the expensive kind that cost more than Jake made in a day. She'd already filled it once and was working on what looked like a second container. "Ma'am," Jake called out, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. "Ma'am, excuse me." The woman Miranda, according to the name embroidered on her blazer, didn't look up. She continued, filling her bottle, the water splashing slightly as she adjusted the angle. "Ma'am," Jake said again, louder this time. "That's livestock water." Now she glanced up, her dark eyes taking in Jake's sweat-stained shirt, his worn Wranglers, and the dust on his boots. Her expression shifted from mild annoyance to something closer to disdain. "It's water," she said simply, turning back to her task, "and it's a public facility." Jake felt his jaw tighten. Behind him, the cattle were getting more restless, their lowing becoming more frequent. The temperature gauge on his trailer's cooling system was creeping toward the red zone. "Look, lady, I don't want any trouble, but that water's specifically for livestock. There's a drinking fountain inside the store if you need." "I'm not drinking from some filthy truck stop fountain," Miranda interrupted, capping her second bottle and reaching for a third. "This water is perfectly fine, and last I checked, this was still America. I can use whatever public water source I choose." Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. 43 animals were depending on him, and this woman was treating their water supply like her personal convenience store. "Ma'am, please, I've got cattle in that trailer, and they've been on the road for 4 hours in this heat. They need this water." Miranda finally turned to face him fully, and Jake saw something in her expression that made his stomach drop. The cold calculation of someone who'd never been told no by anyone she considered beneath her. "Your cattle," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "are not my problem. I'm a paying customer at this establishment, and I'll use whatever facilities I require." She gestured toward his trailer with one perfectly manicured nail. "Besides, animals drink from puddles and streams. I'm sure they'll be fine with whatever's left." The casual cruelty of it hit Jake like a physical blow. This wasn't ignorance, this was deliberate indifference to suffering. Miranda knew exactly what she was doing. "You don't understand, Jake," said, his voice strained with the effort of staying calm. "Those animals have been stressed for hours. They're overheating. If they don't get water soon, then you should have planned better." Miranda cut him off. She was filling her fourth container now, a large thermos that looked like it could hold a gallon. "Poor planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on mine." Jake stared at her, speechless. In 15 years of hauling livestock, he'd encountered his share of difficult people, but nothing quite like this. The sheer entitlement, the complete lack of empathy, was breathtaking in its callousness. "Please," he said one more time, and he hated the desperate edge that crept into his voice. "Just ... please. They're suffering back there." Miranda glanced toward the trailer, where the sound of restless cattle was becoming impossible to ignore. For a moment, Jake thought he saw something flicker in her expression, maybe recognition, maybe even a trace of conscience. Then she shrugged. "Not my circus, not my monkeys," she said, capping the thermos with a decisive twist. "Or, should I say, not my cattle." She gathered her bottles, 4 of them now, enough water for a small army. As she walked back toward her Tesla, Jake noticed the smug satisfaction in her stride, the way she'd positioned herself to make sure he couldn't access the spigot until she was completely finished. Jake stood there for a moment, watching her load her water into the pristine Tesla, listening to the increasingly urgent sounds from his trailer. The temperature gauge was definitely in the yellow now, and he could see steam rising from the vents. Then Miranda did something that transformed Jake's frustration into something much darker and more dangerous. She walked back to the spigot, turned it on full blast, and let the water run onto the ground while she cleaned her hands and adjusted her hair in the side mirror of her car. Gallons of precious water soaked into the dust while Jake's cattle suffered 20 feet away. When she finally turned off the tap and climbed into her Tesla, Miranda rolled down the window and called out with a smile that was pure poison. "Might want to hurry," she said sweetly. "Your animals are sounding a little thirsty." The Tesla's electric motor hummed to life, and Miranda pulled out of the parking lot with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a game only she knew she was playing. Jake stood there in the settling dust, his hands shaking with rage, and made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Hey, Bill, it's Jake Morrison. I need a favor, a big one." Bill Patterson had been running cattle for 37 years, and in all that time, he'd never heard Jake Morrison sound quite like this. There was something in the younger man's voice, a cold fury that went deeper than mere anger. "What kind of favor, Jake?" Bill asked, setting down his coffee cup on the kitchen table. Through the window of his ranch house, he could see his prize Angus herd grazing in the distance, black shapes moving slowly across the golden grassland. "Just stole water from my cattle," Jake said, his voice tight with controlled rage. 43 head, Bill. They're stressed to hell in this heat. And some city woman in a Tesla just took 4 containers of water from the livestock spigot while my animals were literally crying for it. Bill's weathered face hardened. He'd known Jake since the kid was 16, had watched him grow from a green ranch hand into one of the most reliable haulers in 3 counties. More importantly, Jake loved those animals. Bill had seen him spend his own money on veterinary bills for cattle that weren't even his, had watched him sleep in his truck during blizzards to make sure his charges stayed warm. "Where are you now?" Bill asked. "Millfield truck stop. I got them watered, finally, but Bill..." She looked at those suffering animals, and she just didn't care. Hell, worse than that, she enjoyed it. Bill Patterson was not a man given to quick decisions, but something in Jake's voice made his choice immediate and absolute. In the ranching community, there were unwritten laws, codes that went back generations. You didn't mess with another man's livestock. You didn't deny water to animals in need, and you sure as hell didn't do it for sport. "What's her name?" Bill asked. "I don't know her full name. Miranda something. She had California plates, and she's driving a white Tesla, real estate or corporate type, from the look of her." Bill was already moving toward his computer, his mind working through possibilities. The Patterson Ranch wasn't just any operation, it was one of the largest in the state, with political connections that ran deep and wide. Bill had served on the Cattlemen's Association board for 15 years, had helped write livestock protection legislation, and had friends in law enforcement who understood the sacred nature of animal welfare. "Jake, I want you to do something for me," Bill said, his fingers already flying over the keyboard. "I want you to write down everything that happened exactly as it occurred. Times, locations, what she said, what she did, everything." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Bill said slowly, "that Miranda from California is about to discover that actions have consequences. You said she was corporate." "Yeah, definitely. Expensive suit. That whole power player attitude. Like, she owned the world." Bill's search was already yielding results. There weren't that many white Teslas with California plates in this part of Texas, especially not owned by corporate women named Miranda. His fingers paused over the keyboard as a LinkedIn profile filled his screen. Jake, does the name Miranda Chen ring a bell? Could be. She had some kind of name tag or embroidery on her jacket. Bill clicked through to the profile, and his eyebrows rose. Miranda Chen, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions, Apex Development Corporation, based in San Francisco, but according to her recent posts, she was in Texas scouting potential development sites for a major new project. Well, Bill murmured. "Ms. Chen, you picked the wrong day to mess with the wrong cowboy. What did you find? Your water thief is Miranda Chen, and she works for Apex Development. They're one of those big California firms that comes into rural areas and tries to buy up ranch land for shopping centers and housing developments." Bill's voice grew grimmer as he read. "According to this, she's been in Texas for the past month, and she's got meetings scheduled with county commissioners, planning boards, the whole 9 yards." Jake was quiet for a moment. "So she's here to destroy ranches and turn them into strip malls. That actually makes sense. She looked at those cattle like they were already dead to her." "Jake, where's your next stop?" "Oakville Processing. Should be there in about 2 hours if I don't hit any more delays." "Perfect. After you drop your load, I want you to drive back to Millfield. Park at that truck stop and wait for my call." "Bill, what are you planning?" Bill Patterson smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Miranda Chen thinks she understands how business works in Texas. I'm about to give her a more complete education." After he hung up, Bill sat back in his chair and considered his options. The ranching community in this part of Texas was tight-knit, bound together by shared struggles and mutual respect. They looked out for each other, protected each other, and when one of their own was wronged, especially when animals were involved, they responded as one. Bill's first call was to Sheriff Tom Bradley, a man who'd grown up on a cattle ranch and understood the sacred nature of animal welfare. "Tom, it's Bill Patterson. I need to report an incident of animal cruelty." "What kind of incident?" Bill relayed Jake's story, painting a detailed picture of Miranda's deliberate interference with livestock care. As he spoke, he could hear Tom's breathing grow heavier. "That's not just cruelty, Bill. Under Texas Agricultural Code, deliberately preventing access to water for livestock transport can be prosecuted as a felony, especially in extreme heat conditions." "I was hoping you'd say that. Got any proof?" "Working on it. Jake's writing up a detailed incident report, and I'm betting that truck stop has security cameras. I'll drive over there this afternoon and pull the footage." "You said she works for Apex Development?" "Senior VP. She's here scouting locations for their expansion into Texas." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Bill, I can't make her life difficult just because we don't like her company." "I'm not asking you to, Tom. I'm asking you to enforce Texas law. If she committed a crime, and from what Jake described, she did, then she needs to face the consequences." "Fair enough. I'll investigate this properly and let the evidence speak for itself." Bill's second call was to Marcus Rodriguez, president of the local Cattlemen's Association and owner of the second largest ranch in the county. "Marcus, we got a problem. Someone interfered with livestock transport today, and I think we need to send a message." After explaining the situation, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You know what this means, don't you, Bill? If she's here, scouting for Apex, she's probably already been talking to landowners, making offers. This water thing, it might just be a preview of how she treats people she thinks are beneath her." "That's exactly what I'm thinking. And Marcus, I want you to make some calls. Spread the word about what happened today. I want every rancher, every county official, every business owner to know exactly what kind of person Apex sent to represent them. Consider it done. By tomorrow morning, everyone from here to Houston will know about Miranda Chen and her attitude toward Texas livestock." Bill's third call was to his daughter Sarah, who worked in public relations for a major firm in Dallas. "Daddy, "What can I do for you, Sarah, honey? I need you to help me with something." "There's this woman, Miranda Chen, works for Apex Development. She did something today that I think people should know about." As Bill told the story, he could hear Sarah's typing in the background. "Daddy, this is ... Wow, okay. I'm looking at her social media right now, and she's been posting about her Texas trip. Lots of photos of herself at fancy restaurants, talking about educating the locals about progress and bringing civilization to cattle country. This is not going to play well." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Daddy, that in the age of social media, corporate executives who show callous disregard for animals, especially in Texas, to become viral cautionary tales very quickly, especially when they're already being tone-deaf about rural communities." Bill felt a slow smile spread across his face. "Sarah, if someone were to document Ms. Chen's behavior today, and if it were to be shared widely, what do you think would happen?" "While making classist remarks about rural Texans ... I'd say her career would be over. By lunch tomorrow, and her company, Apex, is publicly traded." "Daddy, their stock price is tied to their reputation. A viral animal cruelty scandal involving a senior executive would cost them millions." After Bill hung up, he sat back and smiled. Miranda Chen had made a critical error. She'd assumed that Jake Morrison was powerless, that his suffering animals didn't matter, that her position protected her from consequences. She was about to learn that, in Texas, you don't mess with a man's cattle, and you especially don't mess with cattle when that man has friends like Bill Patterson. Bill picked up his phone one more time and dialed Jake's number. "Jake, change of plans. Instead of driving back to Millfield, I want you to go home, get some rest, and meet me at the truck stop tomorrow morning at 7. Bring your camera." "What's happening tomorrow morning?" "Tomorrow morning," Bill said, his voice carrying the promise of reckoning, "Miranda Chen is going to discover that stealing water from Texas cattle was the biggest mistake of her corporate career." Miranda Chen woke up in her suite at the Oakville Marriott, feeling like she owned the world. The previous day's victory at the truck stop had been just another confirmation of what she'd always known, that money, position, and the willingness to use both ruthlessly were the only currencies that mattered. The look on that sweaty trucker's face when she'd let the water run onto the ground had been particularly satisfying. She'd built her career on moments like that, on making sure people understood their place in the hierarchy. Apex Development hadn't made her their youngest senior VP by playing nice with the locals. At 6:47 a.m., Miranda pulled her Tesla into the Millfield truck stop for the second time in 2 days. She needed coffee, and the Starbucks at her hotel had been broken. The irony of returning to the scene of yesterday's triumph wasn't lost on her. If anything, it felt like a victory lap. She was completely unprepared for what waited for her in the parking lot. There were cattle everywhere, not just a few head, hundreds of them. Black Angus, Herefords, and Longhorns filled the truck stop's parking area, their massive bodies moving slowly between the fuel pumps around the building and across every inch of asphalt. The air was thick with the sound of lowing, the smell of livestock, and something else that made Miranda's stomach clench, the unmistakable scent of fresh manure. "What the hell?" she whispered, stepping out of her Tesla into what looked like a scene from a fever dream. A cowboy on horseback materialized from behind a semi-truck, his horse stepping carefully around the cattle. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair beneath a worn Stetson, and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades under the Texas sun. When he saw Miranda, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was more mockery than courtesy. "Morning, Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Miranda felt her mouth go dry. "How do you know my name? Word travels fast in these parts. I'm Bill Patterson, and these," he gestured toward the sea of cattle, "are some of my friends. We heard you had some interesting opinions about livestock welfare." "This is ... This is illegal," Miranda sputtered, her corporate training kicking in. "You can't just bring cattle to a public business. There are health codes, regulations." "Oh, there are regulations, all right," Bill agreed pleasantly. "For instance, there are regulations about interfering with livestock transport, about denying water to animals in distress. Sheriff Bradley explained them to me in great detail yesterday evening." As if summoned by his name, a patrol car pulled into the lot, its lights flashing. Sheriff Tom Bradley emerged, a stocky man. In his 50s, whose badge gleamed in the morning sun, he surveyed the scene with the expression of someone who'd seen it all and wasn't particularly impressed by any of it. "Ms. Chen," he said, approaching with a measured stride, "I need to speak with you about an incident that occurred here yesterday." Miranda's pulse quickened. "I don't know what you're talking about. Security footage suggests otherwise." Sheriff Bradley held up a tablet, its screen showing grainy but unmistakable video of Miranda at the water spigot. "This shows you denying access to livestock watering facilities, which under Texas Agricultural Code 161.081 constitutes interference with animal welfare during transport. That's a Class A misdemeanor, ma'am, potentially escalating to a felony given the extreme heat conditions." The blood drained from Miranda's face. A felony for taking water. "That's ridiculous. I was just getting a drink." "4 drinks, Jake." Morrison's voice cut through the morning air. He was walking toward them, his phone held up and recording. "For containers of water while my cattle were suffering in 103-degree heat." Miranda spun around to face him, her composure cracking. You set this up." "I documented a crime," Jake replied calmly. "Everything else is just Texas justice." "Texas justice," Bill Patterson echoed, and there was something in his tone that made Miranda's skin crawl. "See, Ms. Chen, you made a fundamental error yesterday. You assumed that because you work for some big California corporation, you could treat our animals and our people however you pleased." "I don't have to listen to this," Miranda said, turning back toward her Tesla. "I'm leaving." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Sheriff Bradley said, stepping into her path. "The investigation is ongoing, and given that you're from out of state, I'm going to need you to surrender your keys." "You can't do that." "Flight risk assessment, ma'am. Standard procedure for out-of-state suspects in agricultural crimes." Miranda felt panic rising in her chest. This was spiraling out of control. "I want to call my lawyer." "Of course, Bill," Patterson said agreeably. "But first, I think you should see something." He nodded to Jake, who held up his phone. On the screen was a video that made Miranda's heart stop. It was her, yesterday, at the water spigot. But it wasn't just any video, it was professionally edited, with slow-motion shots of her filling her bottles while the sounds of distressed cattle played in the background. Text overlays identified her as Miranda Chen, Senior VP, Apex Development, and described the temperature conditions and the animals' suffering. "That's already been shared with about 30,000 people," Jake said conversationally. "Turns out, folks don't much like watching corporate executives torture animals for fun." Miranda grabbed for the phone, but Jake pulled it back. "I wouldn't do that, ma'am. Assault won't help your situation. This is harassment. This is defamation. This is documentation," Bill Patterson corrected. "And education. See, Ms. Chen, you came to Texas thinking you could buy whatever you wanted. Treat whoever you pleased, however you saw fit, but you made one crucial miscalculation." "What's that?" Miranda asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "You assumed we were powerless." The sound of hooves on asphalt made Miranda turn around. More riders were arriving, a dozen cowboys and cowgirls on horseback, each one driving small groups of cattle. The parking lot was filling up with animals, and the smell was becoming overwhelming. 200 head, Bill announced proudly. "All legally permitted to be here, thanks to a special livestock transport permit I obtained this morning. They'll be here for the next 8 hours, watering and resting, as is their right under Texas Agricultural Code." Miranda looked around. Frantically, every truck driver, every customer, every person in sight was staring at her. Many were holding phones, recording. The video Jake had shown her was already spreading, and now they were creating more content in real time. "This is insane," she whispered. "This is consequences," Bill Patterson replied. "You wanted to play power games, Ms. Chen? Well, congratulations. You're playing with the big boys now." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward with handcuffs. "Miranda Chen, you're under arrest for interference with livestock transport, a violation of Texas Agricultural Code 161.081. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Miranda felt her world collapsing. The cattle continued to move around them, their hooves trampling the ground where she'd so casually wasted water the day before. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being arrested in the middle of a sea of the very animals. She'd shown such contempt for "Wait," she said desperately, as Sheriff Bradley led her toward the patrol car. "Wait, I can explain. I can make this right." Bill Patterson rode alongside them, his horse's hooves clicking on the asphalt. "Miss Chen, you had your chance to make things right yesterday. You chose to let water run onto the ground while animals suffered. Now you get to see how we handle people who abuse Texas livestock." As the patrol car door slammed shut, Miranda caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. 24 hours ago, she'd been the predator, the woman with all the power, the one who made the rules. Now she was sitting in the back of a police car, surrounded by cattle, while her career imploded in real time on social media. Through the window, she could see Jake Morrison talking to a reporter who had apparently arrived to cover the story. The headline was already writing itself: "California executive arrested for animal cruelty at Texas truck stop." And somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of 200 cattle settling in for a long, comfortable day of rest, and watering courtesy of the very spigot she'd monopolized 24 hours earlier. The cows, it seemed, were having the last laugh. The Millfield County Jail had seen its share of Saturday night drunks, domestic disputes, and the occasional cattle rustler. But it had never housed a senior vice president of a Fortune 500 company. Sheriff Bradley had to admit there was a certain satisfaction in watching Miranda Chen trade her designer suit for Orange County-issued scrubs. "Your lawyer's here," Deputy Martinez announced, unlocking the cell door. "Conference room 2. Miranda's legal representation turned out to be everything she'd expected. Richard Steinberg had the look of someone who specialized in making problems disappear. But as he reviewed the file, his confident expression began to crack. "Miranda, we have a problem," he said, settling into his chair across from her in the sterile conference room. "Actually, we have several problems." "Just get me out of here," Miranda snapped. "This whole thing is ridiculous. I took some water from a public facility. That's not a crime, actually. It is." Steinberg opened his tablet and pulls up the relevant statutes. Texas Agricultural Code 161.081 specifically prohibits interference with livestock transport operations. The penalty ranges from a Class A misdemeanor to a third-degree felony, depending on circumstances. What circumstances? Whether the interference resulted in animal suffering or death. In this case, we have 43 head of cattle subjected to extreme heat stress because of your actions. The prosecution has veterinary experts willing to testify that such conditions can be fatal. Miranda felt the blood drain from her face. Fatal. They were just ... They looked fine. They looked fine because Jake Morrison was able to water them. Eventually, but the state will argue that your deliberate interference put those animals at risk of death. That elevates this from a misdemeanor to a felony. This is insane. I work for Apex Development. We have political connections, corporate influence, had Steinberg corrected quietly. "Miranda, I need you to see something." He turned his tablet toward her, and Miranda felt her world tilt. The screen showed her company's stock price from the past 24 hours. It had dropped 18% since yesterday evening. How is that possible? "The video of you at the water spigot has gone viral. 4 million views and climbing. Hashtag corporate cruelty is trending on Twitter. Animal rights groups are calling for boycotts of all Apex properties. The company's PR department is in full crisis mode." Miranda stared at the screen, watching her net worth evaporate in real time. Her stock options, her bonuses, her entire financial future was tied to Apex's performance. "It gets worse," Steinberg continued. "Your CEO, David Morrison, issued a statement an hour ago." The statement appeared on screen, and Miranda read it with growing horror. Apex Development categorically condemns the actions depicted in recent social media posts. "The behavior shown does not reflect our company values or our commitment to ethical business practices. Effective immediately. Senior Vice President Miranda Chen has been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. Are cooperating fully with Texas law enforcement and will take appropriate disciplinary action based on their findings." "They threw me under the bus," Miranda whispered. "They're protecting the company. Standard corporate response to a PR disaster. But I was doing my job. I was in Texas scouting properties for them." "Which brings us to problem number 3, Steinberg said grimly. "Your scouting activities have attracted unwanted attention. The local Ranchers Association has filed complaints with the county. Planning Commission, alleging that Apex used fraudulent practices in their preliminary offers to landowners. That's ridiculous. Everything was legal. Legal, maybe. Ethical. Apparently, your company was offering below-market prices to elderly ranchers, using high-pressure tactics, and failing to disclose the true nature of your development plans. The water incident has given your opponents a symbol they're painting. You, as the face of corporate greed and environmental destruction, Miranda's hands were shaking now. Richard, you have to fix this. That's what I pay you for. I can handle the criminal charges, probably get you a plea deal, community service, maybe some fines. But Miranda, he leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but honest. Your career is over. Apex will fire you the moment this settles. No other major corporation will touch you after this. You're radioactive because of some stupid water. Because you were caught on camera showing callous disregard for animal suffering. And because that video has become a symbol of everything people hate about corporate America, you're not just a defendant anymore, Miranda. You're a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, 3 miles away at the Patterson Ranch, Bill was holding court in his living room. The space was packed with local ranchers, county officials, and journalists, who'd driven in from Dallas and Houston to cover the story. The coffee table was covered with printouts of social media posts, news articles, and legal documents. The preliminary injunction was granted this morning, announced County Commissioner Sarah Walsh. All Apex development activities in the county are suspended pending a full review of their business practices. A cheer went up from the assembled ranchers. Jake Morrison, who'd been given a place of honor on Bill's couch, raised his coffee mug in salute. "What about the criminal case?" asked Marcus Rodriguez. "Sheriff Bradley says it's solid," Bill replied. "The video evidence is clear, and we have witness testimony from Jake. The prosecutor thinks she pled guilty to avoid a trial, and the civil suit filed this morning. Jake's suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with business operations, and animal endangerment. We're seeking damages for the veterinary costs, lost time, and mental anguish." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Bill, I appreciate all this, but I never wanted to get rich off this. I just wanted justice for my cattle." "You'll get justice," Bill assured him, "but there's no reason you shouldn't also get compensation. What she did to you and those animals was inexcusable." The room fell quiet as Bill's daughter Sarah entered, her laptop under her arm and a grim expression on her face. "Daddy, we need to talk," she said. "The story's gotten bigger than we expected." "How much bigger?" "CNN picked it up an hour ago. They're calling it a symbol of the culture war between corporate America and rural values. Miranda Chen has become the poster child for everything wrong with modern capitalism." Bill frowned. "That seems a little extreme." "Maybe, but that's how these things work now. Social media doesn't do nuance. She's either a victim or a villain, and the internet has decided she's a villain." On cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications. The hashtag water thief is trending nationally. Someone created a meme of her face superimposed over a picture. Of dying cattle, it's been shared 200,000 times. Jake looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, I never wanted to destroy anyone's life. I just wanted her to understand that actions have consequences." "I know, Jake, but you can't control how a story spreads once it's out there. Right now, Miranda Chen represents everyone who's ever been screwed over by a corporation, everyone who's ever felt powerless against money and influence. She's not just a person anymore, she's a symbol." "What happens now?" Bill asked. "Now?" Sarah closed her laptop and looked around the room. "Now we find out if the justice system works, or if money and corporate lawyers can still buy their way out of consequences." Back at the jail, Miranda sat alone in her cell, staring at the concrete wall. Through the small window, she could see the parking lot of the truck stop in the distance. The cattle were gone now, but the damage was done. For the first time in her adult life, Miranda Chen felt truly powerless. No amount of money, no corporate connections, no legal maneuvering could undo what had happened. She'd made a choice in a moment of callous indifference, and that choice had exposed her true character to the world. The worst part wasn't the criminal charges or the civil suit or even the career destruction. The worst part was that deep down, she knew they were right about her. She had looked at those suffering animals and felt nothing but contempt. She had used her power to cause unnecessary pain, simply because she could. As the sun set over Millfield County, Miranda Chen finally began to understand what Jake Morrison had tried to tell her at the water spigot. Actions have consequences, and some prices can't be paid with money or influence. Sometimes, the only currency that matters is justice. And justice, it seemed, had a very long memory and a taste for irony. 3 months later, the Millfield County Courthouse was packed beyond capacity. What had started as a simple misdemeanor case had evolved into something much larger: a referendum on corporate power, animal rights, and the clash between urban privilege and rural values. News vans lined the street outside, and protesters held signs reading "Justice for Jake's cattle" and "Corporate criminals go to prison." Miranda Chen sat at the defendant's table in a conservative navy suit, a far cry from the designer power outfit she'd worn that fateful day at the truck stop. 3 months in legal limbo had taken their toll. She'd lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, and acquired the hollow look of someone whose entire world had collapsed overnight. Her new lawyer, a public defender named Janet Torres, was competent but overworked. Richard Steinberg had quietly withdrawn from the case after Apex stopped paying his fees, leaving Miranda to navigate the justice system like any other defendant who couldn't afford premium representation. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hawkins," the bailiff announced. Judge Hawkins was a Millfield native who'd practiced agricultural law for 20 years before taking the bench. She understood cattle, she understood ranchers, and she had no patience for legal gamesmanship. As she surveyed the packed courtroom, her expression was stern but fair. "This is a criminal proceeding, not a circus," she announced. "I will tolerate no outbursts, no demonstrations, and no disruption of any kind. Anyone who can't abide by that standard is welcome to wait outside." Prosecutor David Martinez rose for his opening statement. He was young but thorough, and he'd built his case methodically over the past 3 months. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about choice," he began. On August 15th, the defendant had a choice. She could have shown basic human decency to a working man and the animals in his care. Or she could have prioritized her own convenience over their suffering. The evidence will show that Miranda Chen made her choice deliberately, callously, and with full knowledge of the consequences. Martinez walked to a large monitor and clicked a remote. The courtroom fell silent as the security footage from the truck stop began to play. Even 3 months later, the video was still devastating. There was Miranda, filling bottle after bottle while Jake pleaded with her. There was the moment she let water run onto the ground while cattle lowed in distress. In the background, the defendant didn't just take water, Martinez continued. She weaponized it. She used her perceived power to inflict unnecessary suffering on defenseless animals and to humiliate a hardworking Texan who was simply trying to do his job. When it came time for the defense, Janet Torres did her best with an impossible situation. "My client made a mistake," she told the jury. "She was tired, stressed, and operating in an unfamiliar environment. What happened that day was thoughtless, not malicious. Ms. Chen has already paid a severe price for her poor judgment. She's lost her career, her reputation, and her financial security. The law requires intent to harm, and the evidence simply doesn't support that standard." But when Torres called Miranda to testify in her own defense, everything went wrong. "Ms. Chen," Torres began gently, "can you tell the jury about your state of mind on August 15th? Miranda had rehearsed this moment for weeks, but, sitting in the witness box, facing a jury of 12 Millfield residents, she found herself struggling to find words that didn't sound scripted or insincere. I was focused on my work," she said finally. "I had important meetings, deadlines to meet. I wasn't thinking clearly about the impact of my actions." "Were you aware that the water you were using was designated for livestock?" "I saw the sign, but I assumed it was just a suggestion, a guideline, not a strict rule." Prosecutor Martinez's cross-examination was devastating. "Ms. Chen, you testify that you thought the livestock designation was just a suggestion. Is that your position?" "Well, yes or no. Ms. Chen, did you think the sign was a suggestion?" "I suppose I thought, Ms. Chen, in your corporate work. When you see a sign that says executive parking only, do you consider that a suggestion?" "No. But when you see a sign in a hotel that says authorized personnel only, Do you ignore it because you consider it a guideline? Miranda's face flushed. That's different. How is it different, Ms. Chen? Please explain to this jury how livestock welfare is less important than parking regulations. The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. Miranda's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Let me ask you another question, Martinez continued. When Mr. Morrison explained that his cattle were suffering, what was your response? I told him it wasn't my problem. Your exact words, according to the security footage, were not my circus, not my monkeys. Is that correct? Yes. And then you proceeded to waste water by letting it run on the ground while cleaning your hands. Is that correct? I was just, yes or no, Ms. Chen? Yes. How long did you let the water run? I don't know. A minute, maybe 2. The security footage shows 3 minutes and 47 seconds of water running onto the ground while cattle in distress were audible. In the background, does that sound about right? Miranda's voice was barely a whisper. I suppose. During those 3 minutes and 47 seconds, did it occur to you that you were wasting a resource that suffering animals desperately needed? I wasn't. Thinking about it, you weren't thinking about 43 living creatures suffering in 103-degree heat. No, Ms. Chen, in all your corporate training, all your business education, did anyone ever teach you that causing unnecessary suffering to animals might be wrong? Janet Torres objected, but the damage was done. Miranda's own testimony had painted her as exactly what the prosecution claimed, a callous corporate executive who viewed animals and working people as beneath her consideration. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours on the charge of interference with livestock transport operations, a violation of Texas Agricultural Code 161.081. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause before Judge Hawkins could restore order. When it came time for sentencing, Jake Morrison asked to address the court. Your Honor, he said, standing with his hat in his hands, I don't take any pleasure in seeing Ms. Chen convicted. I never wanted to destroy anyone's life. But what happened that day? It showed me something about the kind of person she is, and I think she needed to learn that her actions have consequences. He paused, looking directly at Miranda. I hope she uses this experience to become a better person. Those cattle, they couldn't speak for themselves. Someone had to. Judge Hawkins nodded solemnly. Ms. Chen, please rise for sentencing. Miranda stood on unsteady legs, her future hanging in the balance. The court finds that your actions on August 15th were not only criminal but morally reprehensible, Judge Hawkins began. You showed callous disregard for animal welfare and basic human decency. However, this court also recognizes that you have already suffered significant consequences for your actions. Therefore, I sentence you to 6 months in county jail, suspended, 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service to be performed at local animal shelters, and a fine of $10,000 to be donated to livestock welfare organizations. As the gavel fell, Miranda felt her knees buckle. It was over. The criminal case was finished, but her real punishment was just beginning. She would carry the weight of this conviction, this public humiliation, for the rest of her life. Outside the courthouse, Jake Morrison was surrounded by reporters. Someone asked if he felt vindicated by the verdict. I feel like justice was done, he said simply. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. But as Miranda was led away to begin processing for her probation, she couldn't help but notice something that made her heart sink even further. Across the street, barely visible through the crowd of protesters and journalists, was a familiar figure on horseback. Bill Patterson sat astride his horse, watching the proceedings with the satisfied expression of a man who'd seen justice served. When their eyes met across the chaos, he touched the brim of his hat in the same mocking salute he'd given her that morning at the truck stop. The message was clear. This was far from over. The civil trial was still to come.